The sound of ribs cracking isn't loud like in the movies. It's wet, muffled, almost private, like your body's trying to keep the betrayal to itself. I was pinned between the bathroom sink and her knees, my back arched the wrong way, and her elbow pressing down with a force she swore came from God. I didn't scream, not this time. I'd learned early that screaming made her keep going. Silence sometimes confused her. She liked a reaction. She fed on noise. I said, "Stand up straight," she hissed through clenched teeth, still in her church heels, still in her apron. I remember the buckle of her belt digging into my skin as she leaned over me. Slouching is sin. Pain is correction. You'll thank me later. When she let go, I dropped like a sack of grain. The bathroom tiles were cold against my cheek, and I felt my breath snag in my chest like it had to navigate through a maze of broken glass. She stepped over me, not around, over. The hallway light flickered as she walked away, her shadow, long and proud. I waited until I heard the door slam to her room before I let my mouth open. No sound came, just dry air and copper. My tongue tasted like pennies. I remember crawling to my room, dragging my left side like a half-dead dog. I didn't cry. Crying makes you feel alive. I didn't want to feel alive. There are people who look back on childhood and call it golden. Mine was rust, peeling, sharp, poisonous if left in the body too long. But I didn't leave it. I carried it. They say the body keeps the score. Mine kept a ledger, and the X-ray they took when I was 27 proved it. 2 ribs never healed right, and that's exactly where I started. I was 10 the first time she hit me. It wasn't even that bad, not compared to what came later, but it left a mark in a place no one could see. We were in the kitchen, just the 2 of us. I had spilled a glass of milk, reaching for the cereal, and the glass shattered. She didn't shout. That would have been too easy. She just looked at me, slow and quiet like a wolf deciding whether to lunge or wait. "You waste what God provides, and you disrespect the hands that feed you," she said, her voice syrupy with righteousness. Then she slapped me, open palm, right cheek. I remember the sting more than the pain, the burn, the disbelief. She cleaned the mess herself, told me to sit, told me not to tell anyone or she'd tell them I attacked her. I believed her. She had a way of making anything sound true. The next morning, she packed my lunch with extra apple slices and a folded napkin that said, "Be good today." I kept that napkin in my pocket until it tore into pieces. I think I wanted to believe it meant she loved me, that I deserved the slap, that I could be better. That was the first time I froze. Not because of fear, but because I didn't understand. My brain short-circuited. My body waited for someone else to step in. But no one did. They never did. I told the teacher I tripped. I told the neighbor I bruised easy. I told myself I was clumsy. And when I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling fan, I promised myself it wouldn't happen again. I broke that promise 367 times. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Too fast, too sudden. A bend in the road, a drunk driver, and a flame that swallowed them before I could even say goodbye. I was asleep at a cousin's sleepover when it happened. By morning, I was an orphan. Enter Aunt Lorraine. She wasn't my mother's sister or my father's. She was the wife of my dad's older brother, Uncle Reggie. He was military stationed overseas most of the time. Lorraine lived alone in a dusty adobe house at the edge of the Arizona desert, where the sun baked everything dry and the wind carried secrets that nobody wanted to claim. She told the court she'd raise me like her own. "The Lord has given me a mission," she said with her thin lips and thick Bible. "I'll correct what grief has made crooked." No one questioned her. I suppose it was easier that way. I was small, quiet, easy to move, easier to forget. Reggie was rarely around. When he did return, it was for a few days of silence and empty beer bottles. He never hit me. He never even looked at me much. He floated above the violence, pretending not to hear, not to see. I remember once after Lorraine slapped me so hard my ear rang for hours, I caught Reggie looking at me while she scolded me for unholy disobedience. His face was blank, like he'd already written me off. Then there were the church people. They saw me in bruised sleeves and long skirts and whispered words like troubled and wild. Lorraine was always nearby to shake her head and sigh. We're doing what we can. No one asked me anything. I don't think they cared to. I was just a sad little shadow hanging off the hem of a godly woman. And she loved that image. She told people I was her burden, a gift from God meant to test her strength. She'd pray over me at dinner, her hands clenched tight over mine, muttering words about obedience and pain. Pain teaches, she'd say, as if it were a hymn. Pain purifies. She didn't teach love, she taught silence. She didn't offer kindness, she offered control. By the time I turned 11, I had memorized the exact number of steps it took to run from the kitchen to my room without being caught. 13. 13 steps to nowhere. I learned how to survive by becoming a ghost. I figured out early that stillness was safety. The less I moved, the less she noticed me. The less I spoke, the fewer chances she had to twist my words into sin. I folded myself into silence like origami sharp edges hidden inside soft creases. I was good at disappearing in plain sight. Every morning I made her coffee exactly the way she liked it, black bitter 1 spoon of sugar. I memorized her routines, her moods, her signals. If she hummed hymns while sweeping, it was a good day. If she slammed the cupboard doors, it was time to keep my head down and my hands busy. School wasn't an escape, it was another stage. I wore long sleeves even in the heat, smiled at the right times, got straight A's. Teachers liked me because I was so polite. They didn't see the way I winced when someone brushed my shoulder. They didn't notice how I flinched when someone raised their voice. I kept notebooks, dozens of them, filled them with facts, drawings, fake diary entries I knew she might read. But the real ones, the real entries I kept hidden, tucked inside textbooks, behind peeling wallpaper, under floorboards. I wrote everything. What she said, what she did, the dates, the time of day, what she wore, what I felt. Obsessive maybe, but it kept me sane. It gave me proof that I wasn't imagining things, that the pain was real, that I was real. I learned how to fake sleep with my eyes half open, how to breathe shallow so the pain in my ribs wouldn't scream, how to count to 100 over and over so I wouldn't hear her praying curses over my name. Sometimes she'd go a few days without touching me, and I'd think maybe this is it. Maybe she's changed. But it was never true. The calm was just a pause between storms. She said I was born broken, that she was doing the Lord's work by fixing me, that girls like me needed firm hands. I believed her for a while. I believed I was unlovable, that the bruises were my fault, that if I just tried harder, bent lower, stayed smaller, maybe she'd stop. She didn't. But I became very good at pretending she did. The worst came when I was 13. It was summer and Arizona was blistering, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer like a lie. I was outside hanging laundry because she said dryers were for the wasteful and wicked. The wind had kicked up, tugging the sheets from my fingers, and one fell into the dirt. She saw. From the window. I froze the sheet, clutched in my arms, my feet rooted in cracked earth. I knew she'd come out. I knew she'd be fast. But that day she brought the broom. She didn't shout. She didn't scold. She walked toward me like she was on her way to bless someone, calm, focused. I remember the crunch of gravel under her heels and the way the broom handle tapped against her leg, light and rhythmic. "You dirty what God provides," she murmured low like a lullaby, and then she swung. The first blow hit my back, knocking the wind out of me. The second struck my legs. I tried to run, but the hem of my skirt tangled in my knees. I went down, arms shielding my head, ribs exposed. She hit me again and again, I don't know how many times. I only remember the white-hot stab when the broom cracked across my left side. It felt like something inside me tore. I didn't scream. I whimpered. And that was worse. She knelt beside me and grabbed my face with one hand hard enough to leave fingerprints. "You don't cry," she whispered. "Crying is rebellion, and rebellion is sin." Later that night, I couldn't lie flat. Every breath was a razor. She didn't let me go to the hospital. Said the Lord would heal what needed healing. Said if I told anyone, I'd go straight to hell for lying. So I taped my own ribs with strips of old cloth, holding them together like broken promises. I slept sitting up for weeks, propped against the wall, whispering numbers into the dark to keep myself awake because dreaming meant weakness, and weakness meant pain. That night, I found a dead lizard under the bed. Its body was stiff tail curled around itself like it had tried to hide from death. I touched its tiny skull and thought, Icky, this is what I look like to her. Disposable, fragile, nameless. I didn't bury it. I kept it in a jar under my floorboard. I needed to remember what happens when no one helps. I left 2 days after my 14th birthday. There was no suitcase, no note, no goodbye. Just a whisper of air as the screen door clicked shut behind me. It was early before sunrise. The desert was still like it was holding its breath with me. She was asleep, or drunk, or praying, maybe all three. I wore jeans I'd hidden under my mattress and a t-shirt from a donation box at church. The soles of my shoes were worn thin, but they carried me across the gravel and down the road without a sound. I didn't look back. I was afraid if I did, I'd turn to Salt Lake in the stories. No one chased me. No dogs barked. Even the sky stayed quiet as if it, too, agreed it was time. I didn't have a plan, just the name of a shelter I'd heard another girl whisper about at school once. They take runaways, she'd said, eyes darting like prey. If you don't mind rules. I didn't mind rules, I minded cages. It took me 4 hours to walk there. My ribs ached the whole way, every step a dull throb beneath my skin. I held my breath whenever a car passed, afraid someone from church would recognize me, drag me back, tell me I was ungrateful. But no one did. When I reached the shelter, I stood outside the gate for 15 minutes, watching kids laugh and eat powdered donuts from a folding table. One of the volunteers noticed me. She didn't smile, just nodded like she'd seen this before. She opened the gate and said, "We got room." That night they gave me a bed. Clean sheets, orange juice, bandages, no questions. I slept for 12 hours. When I woke, I didn't cry. I didn't talk. I just stared at the ceiling fan, listening to it hum, a softer version of the one in Aunt Lorraine's hallway. I thought I'd feel free. I didn't. I felt empty, like the hurt had left a shape inside me and now I had to carry it. But I also felt something else, a flicker, a fact. She couldn't reach me anymore. She didn't know where I was. And she never would. Time passed like wind across sand, slow but steady, wearing down the edges of what had once felt sharp. I moved cities, got placed in foster care, then a better home, then a scholarship. People said I was resilient. I smiled when they said that, but inside I thought, you have no idea what it cost me just to stand here. I kept my head down, studied hard, graduated early, worked nights at a gas station, saved every dollar. I learned to build a life brick by brick even when my hands still shook. Even when I couldn't sleep unless the door was locked twice and the light was on. College was a blur of textbooks and therapists who tried to unravel the knots I didn't know how to name. I told one of them about Lorraine. Just once. She asked if I ever thought about confronting her. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I had already written the script in my head 100 times by then. No, I didn't want confrontation. Not yet. I wanted evidence. I wanted receipts. I wanted the kind of truth that couldn't be denied or spiritualized away. So I got copies of my medical records. From the ER visit when I finally had insurance and told them my old injury still hurt. The doctor took one look at the X-ray and said, "You broke these years ago." I nodded, didn't say more, but I asked for the image. It was black and white, clean and cold, 2 ribs healed wrong, slightly curved inward, like parentheses around a sentence no one wanted to read. I printed it, framed it, put it on my desk. Next to that, I kept the jar with the dried lizard bones. A reminder. I started writing. Essays, memoirs, anonymous blog posts that thousands of women read and shared. Your pain is not your fault, I wrote. But what you do with it, that's yours to choose. People called me brave. I wasn't brave. I was angry, precise, patient. I smiled on the outside. Built a name for myself. Got a job at a local station doing research and scripting. I was the quiet girl behind the camera. No one knew that I had spent my childhood being told I was nothing. No one knew that I still heard her voice at night hissing scripture into my bones. I kept climbing, silent, focused, until one day they offered me a segment of my own, live, on local TV, and I knew exactly what to do. I returned to that desert town just before my 27th birthday. No one recognized me. The girl who had left was scrawny, bruised a shadow in a borrowed skirt. The woman who walked back in wore dark jeans, leather boots, and a black blazer with sharp shoulders. My hair was longer, now sleek, my posture straight, not because someone forced me, but because I chose to take up space. I didn't smile. I stayed in a nearby motel 2 towns over, rented a car, watched from a distance. Lorraine still lived in the same adobe house, still put out her plastic lawn angels, still hosted prayer circles every Tuesday night, still lied. She didn't age well. Her skin had gone papery, her movements slower, but her voice, oh, that voice still cracked through the walls like a whip when she barked at the neighbor boy for letting his dog piss on her fence. She had no idea. At the grocery store, she walked right past me. She didn't recognize my eyes. That stung more than I thought it would. But it made things easier. I made a few calls, pitched a hometown hero segment to my station, something feel-good, told them I wanted to highlight unsung community voices. Women of faith, I said, caretakers, survivors. My producer loved it. I didn't flinch when they scheduled the segment for Tuesday. Lorraine was thrilled to be chosen. Of course she was. She showed up early to the studio in a beige dress with lace at the collar, gripping her Bible like a trophy. She brought a framed photo of her and Uncle Reggie, said she'd raised a girl once, but the Lord took her elsewhere. I sat in the makeup chair 2 feet away. She didn't know. Not until the cameras started rolling. Not until I sat across from her mic, clipped to my blazer script in my hand, and said her name like it was made of glass. Her lips parted just a little. I saw the twitch, the recognition. Then I smiled for the first time. Tonight, I said to the audience, we speak with a woman who raised a child after a tragedy, who says her journey is one of sacrifice, discipline, and deep faith. Lorraine straightened, smiled her church smile, said, "That's right, child." And I said clear into the mic, "Let's talk about the price of obedience." I pulled out the X-ray. The image filled the monitor behind us. 2 broken ribs healed crooked. The studio went silent, and for the first time in her life, so did she. She stared at the X-ray like it was a foreign language she didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Just a dry exhale like dust being let out of a tomb. This, I said calmly, was taken 2 years ago. The doctor said the injury happened over a decade earlier, around the time I was 13, around the time I lived with you. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence did it for me. The producer blinked hard behind the glass. The cameraman shifted but kept rolling. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed even. Lorraine's fingers tightened around the Bible in her lap. I could see her working through excuses, readying her sanctimonious denial. But I was faster. I reached down and lifted a folder onto the table between us. Inside were photocopies of journal pages I had written as a child, dates, descriptions, times, the weather on the day she broke my ribs, the psalm she recited as she hit me, the hymn she hummed while wiping blood off the kitchen floor. I didn't hand them to her. I just let them sit there, visible, undeniable. My name, I said, staring directly into the camera, is Clara May Holtz, and the woman sitting across from me didn't raise me. She broke me. Again and again. In this woman's house, pain was scripture, correction was violence, love was a leash. Lorraine's face had gone pale, her smile twitching at the corners like it wanted to disappear. "You said I'd thank you one day," I continued. "This is your thanks." The segment ended with no commercial break, just a hard cut to black. Afterward, she tried to speak to me in the hallway. She reached out her hand and I stepped back like I was still that child. But I wasn't. "I prayed for you every day," she whispered, her voice thinned with age and panic. I looked her in the eye. "And I burned every prayer you ever gave me." She blinked, like the words hit harder than the truth ever could. She left without speaking to anyone else. There was no camera on her exit, no applause, just a door shutting. just the sound of a woman finally realizing she no longer owned the story. I didn't watch the broadcast that night. I didn't need to. I already knew how it ended. A week later, someone sent me a photo of her house. Spray paint on the stucco walls. Words in black, child beater. Shame. You'll thank me later. The community turned fast. That's how it goes in towns like that, tight-lipped until the silence breaks, then loud in their distance, eager to prove they were never complicit. The church removed her from the Women's Council. Her prayer circle stopped meeting. The grocery store she once haunted in pearls and gossip now greeted her with turned backs and cold stares. She tried to make a statement, claimed it was a smear campaign, that I was a liar, a bitter soul who twisted love into hate. She said I was clever with editing and driven by demons. But the X-ray didn't lie. Neither did the journals. And I didn't respond. Not once. Not even when the local paper asked for an exclusive. I gave them nothing, not a quote, not a photo, not a headline. Because revenge wasn't in the cameras or the crowds. It was in the knowing. She had spent her life sculpting her image godly, noble, misunderstood. She coded her abuse in scripture, painted her cruelty in pastel colors and charity baskets. And I took all of that. I didn't yell. I didn't hit back. I didn't scream in her face or demand apologies. I just exposed her. Left her naked in front of the very town she had fooled. She couldn't rebuild from that. Meanwhile, I went back to my motel room, kicked off my boots, and sat on the bed in the quiet. No champagne, no celebration, just the hum of the air conditioner and the weight of breath in my chest. I pulled the framed X-ray from my bag and placed it on the nightstand, not as a trophy, as a tombstone. Some pain dies slow, but some justice, when finally served, doesn't need to announce itself. It just ends. And that was enough.